Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day today. And we welcome Richard Santos here. My name is Jonathan Connors. I'm a board member here with the Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center. And we definitely appreciate Richard for joining us today. This is our live author stream. Big thank you to Southwest 66 Credit Union for sponsoring this year, 2023. They sponsor all the live streams, so we definitely appreciate that. Richard, how are you doing this morning, this afternoon? Kind of crossing the line into afternoon here.
I know, right? It's about to officially be afternoon, and it's a good afternoon. I feel good about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been a good day so far. Austin's been under one of these like heat domes all summer, and everyone's excited that now it's only 97 degrees.
yes.
It feels like a brand new world.
Yeah, that's what I was excited about 97 here as well. And I was like, that's just crazy how hot it's been. But yeah, we'll jump in here with some questions for you. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself and tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, my name's Richard Santos. My I'll start with like my books, I guess. My debut novel came out in 2020. It's called Trust Me. It's a thriller set in Santa Fe that has to do with the sort of like shady backroom deals that are surrounding the construction of a brand new airport outside of Santa Fe. And then a body gets found in the construction site, and the story expands from there. Um, I also recently edited this book called A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories, which came out from Arte Publico Press just in June. It's already September, yeah, so it's been a few months. I'm a writer. I've had a lot of work published in Texas Monthly lately. I've got fiction and essays in different places. I used to be a high school English and social studies teacher, but for the past few years, I've been executive director of Austin Batcave, and we're a creative writing nonprofit in Austin, and we provide free creative writing workshops, mostly in Title I schools. But we also host our own summer camps as well. We also have some virtual programs. So that means that anyone, like for example, anyone in the Permian Basin, can sign up for some of our virtual programs. We have some adult programs, and also we'll have some virtual youth programs. And my background is actually our Batmobile. This is our mobile library and classroom, which is great. Kids love it, adults love it, everyone loves it. Post COVID, we've really been using it to give away books, and it makes appearances at some of our workshops as well. And it's fun. We have a good time at Austin Batcave. Hope y'all check it out.
I love that idea. I do think that's a big part of education is getting the community involved, not just.
Jonathan froze a little bit there. Hopefully you can hear me.
Hey guys, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. We will be back in just a moment.
Okay, that was definitely me, and I'm sorry about that. My computer was working just fine, and now it decided to not work. So, but anyways, what I was saying was, that's a pretty cool idea. I would really like to look more into that. It's a really cool idea. I think that's an awesome idea. Let me just give me 1 second here, and I'm gonna get situated on my phone, and we'll jump right back in. This is I'm sorry. So this is Literacy Month. So tell us what got you into literacy. Have you always been into literacy? Give us a little bit more about your background as far as how important literacy is to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I I was always fond of just writing stories or little like lines from potential poems or things for a long time. Although I didn't really honestly get super serious about it until my late 20s. That's when I finally sat down to be like, you know what, I'm going to actually start like finishing some stories. I'm going to actually start like trying to send things out, which is the hard part, right? Like coming up with an idea might be easy, but it's the sitting down, finishing it, revising it, fixing it, like rethinking it, changing it. That's the stuff that
Mhm.
takes the time commitment. And um, it was in my late 20s, early 30s when I really got serious about that. And what's interesting is that I have my MFA from Texas State University, so that's a creative writing degree. Um, and I had a teaching role while getting that as well. And so teaching like college freshmen, and then after I graduated, I was working as a high school English teacher. I also taught eighth grade. Um, it really sort of changes your relationship with writing, with not just creativity and communication, but like literacy, with actual writing itself, right? Because you have to start thinking like, okay, I know why this essay or this draft or this outline or whatever a student gives me isn't really like working, but how do I communicate to them? All right, yeah, needs to like has some work to be done. But it's the worst teacher in the world says, "Oh yeah, you gotta do this again." Like that's not helpful to anybody. You need
Mhm.
to give them something specific, right? You need to give them some actual like structure. You need to give them some actual support so that they can see that they're getting better as well. So I think I learned a lot about language and how other people view writing by having to teach, and really like by having to teach other people how to like improve their writing. And you would think there's a huge difference in the kind of advice you give an eighth grader versus like a 13th grader, like a freshman or sophomore in college. But really, it's kind of not. It's kind of like still all the same advice. It's still about like clarity and looking for the errors that you know that you're prone to make as a writer, and then just working with them slowly to get better.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm not gonna lie. When I was in high school, it's a difficult time. It's hard for kids, and it's hard to kind of get through to them. And I feel like it's really important to kind of, like what you were saying, just really kind of learn how to communicate and how to keep them intrigued by it, because it's definitely important. Literacy, writing, all that stuff is really important. And I feel like that's why I joined the board, is just because it's we need more of an emphasis on it. You kind of went over the next question I had was already, so we'll kind of get into more about the book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book, and
Sure.
what inspired you to write it, and how the development of it came? I'm curious about that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's called A Night of Screams, and it's an anthology. So there's 20 pieces in here by 18 writers, and it's a horror anthology. And really, if you go into any bookstore or any like book website or in your library, there's a ton of really great horror that's being written out there right now, like across the board, across the world. There's some really great stuff out there. I think that if you look at the history of the horror genre, which as a genre didn't really exist probably until like the 70s when horror movies started really like
Mhm.
becoming a little bit more respected. And then in the 80s, you of course have writers like Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and then a little bit later Clive Barker and so on. Um, all of a sudden, these books are everywhere, and there are people across the country reading them. It doesn't matter who you are, right? Horror wasn't some it's not like the kid, there's a whole subplot in Stranger Things about how like the horror kids are sort of like outsiders and weirdos and maybe a little bit suspicious. Starting in the mid 80s, everyone's reading Stephen King, right? Your grandma's
Mhm.
reading Cujo or something like that.
Mhm.
It's out there. It still freaks some people out, sure. Um, but it becomes a lot more legitimate. And so what you have now, in 2023 is you have all these writers who grew up reading Stephen King and reading Goosebumps by R.L. Stein and watching
Mhm.
Afraid of the Dark and watching
Mhm.
classic horror movies, but also reading things, other things at school, like Kurt Vonnegut or Toni Morrison or whatever. And so now you have all these like really great writers who are drawing from the books they read, the movies they watched, and are doing some really cool stuff. Um, like there is a horror book out there for everybody. If you're a poet who only likes really slow moving, really in-depth literary stuff, you can find a horror writer. If you just like zombies and slashing things and like kind of gory stuff, great. There's a lot of books out there for you. And to get back to the book, one thing that's really evident out there is that there's a lot of like Latinos, there's a lot of Latinx writers out there who are doing some really cool horror stuff, Uh, a lot of those big horror writers from the 80s and 90s were all sort of like, they're all kind of guys from New England, right? They're guys that kind of like fit a type. But now there's a lot more diverse writers out there. And I was like, man, it would be really fun to try to put together a collection of Latinx writers who are doing horror. And that's what I set out to do. Like I wanted to draw from established horror writers. So we have writers like V. Castro, who does a lot of work with, like, her most recent novel is kind of a take on the La Llorona story, one of the most classic like stories out there. She's well established in the horror realm, but we also have writers that are new to horror in this collection, like Ruben Degollado, who's from McAllen, whose novel The Family Izquierdo last year was nominated for a ton of awards. It was just a beautiful book. I reached out to him and I was like, "Hey, I know you don't really do horror, but what do you think?" And he was like, "Great." And he wrote like a zombie story, which is really good. So it's an interesting blend, I hope, of like people playing in the horror like box for the first time, and
Mhm.
people who have like who are a lot more established and who have already sort of like earned their horror stripes over the year. Um, so yeah, I think there's something for everybody in here. There's even a few like poems in here. Like I wanted it to be like a broad ranging anthology.
Mm. That's really interesting. That's a very interesting perspective, and definitely very productive, with the diversity angle, because, a lot of us grew up with the horror, and that's a good point. The Stephen King became really popular, like with my generation, and even with older generations got into it, and it's really interesting kind of seeing it evolve, into different things, and including all sorts of different people.
Yeah,
Is While you were saying that, I was like, a lot of horror, especially originally, was very New England, Northeast based
sure.
type stories, and because I grew up there, so a lot of stuff I was correlated with my childhood, so it was kind of interesting to kind of think about that part too. But anyways, we'll jump into the selection of the book, the section of the book that you would like to read from,
Sure.
and we'll give you the floor for that, and we'll get that started.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, there are a lot of pieces in here. Some of them are short. Some of them are short as a page. Some of them are closer to 20 pages. There's a couple poems. I've got an introduction too, where I try to set out sort of like why I wanted to put this book together and some of the themes that we think we're seeing there. But I'm not going to read from my introduction. I'm going to read the very first piece. It's by Monique Quintana, whose novel Cenote City is a really cool, interesting read that y'all should look up. And this story, it's only 2 pages long, so I'm going to read the whole thing. It's called Dark Lord of the Rainbow, which and it deals with a really common um, urban legend that should be really familiar, especially to Mexican Americans out there, but really to everybody at this point. Okay, so this is Dark Lord of the Rainbow by Monique Quintana. When you're 9, your grandmother tells you the story about the Rainbow Ballroom to scare you. She tells you the story while making you a Shirley Temple right before bedtime. She uses a tiny glass jam jar instead of a cup. The way the story goes, she says, there was a teenage girl who met a beautiful man in the ballroom, and he asked her to go on a moonlit drive. Your grandmother tells you this is where she goes wrong. She should have stayed there with her friends. She's lucky she got to go out in the first place. Your grandmother drops a cherry in your soda, and you watch the fizz come up the jar like an amoeba. That should have been enough fun for her, your grandmother tells you. The girl looks down and sees the man has hooves where his feet should be. No one ever sees the girl again. You ask your grandmother how she, or anyone for that matter, could know the man had hooved feet if the girl had disappeared. Your grandmother doesn't answer your question. She shakes her way out of the kitchen and into her garden. Your grandmother will take you to visit your aunt's house in Parkside. While your grandmother's talking to her sister in the kitchen, your cousin invites you to her bedroom, and under her canopy, puffy like clouds, you sit on her bed and tell her about the beautiful man with hooved feet. Your cousin is 7 years old and has Spaniard skin and hair blacker than your own. Yes, she tells you. She sticks her finger in the dimple on her face. There was such a man with hooves where his feet should be. Everyone knows the story because the girl danced all night with him. She came home with the rain in her hair and blisters on her feet and tequila in her mouth. And then your cousin taps your throat with her fingertips, and they burn there like 3 sticks of copal. The girl has curly hair like you and is as dark as you. She irons her hair before she goes out the way you do now. There is a disco ball with green and yellow lights. The woman wears a red polyester dress that feels like silk in your hands. You wrap the dress around her breasts and ribs and her empty womb. You tie the dress and ribbons at her thighs. The beautiful man finds her and asks her to dance. He smells like pricey cologne and leather, and his hair is slicked back over his earlobes, and the sun has scorched his skin the way you like it. He speaks to her in Spanish. You don't know how to speak Spanish, so the girl hears his words in reverse, and she reads his intentions on his fingertips as they run up her back. The girl leaves with the man in his Chevy Malibu. The air is warm and slow, bleeding with rain. Fingers fall on the skin. The buildings go by in pitch and blue and trees and dust. She looks down at the gas pedal. She looks down to where his feet should be. She knows. The moon tips over his hooves and sighs.
Awesome. What would you think your biggest takeaway that you wanted people to kind of get from that?
From that piece,
Yeah.
um, I think it's fun because it plays with that classic, like mm, the the classic sort of like story that kids are told, like this is why you shouldn't sneak out at night, this is why you shouldn't go to these random places to dance with strangers because one of them might be the devil, or like, La Llorona will get you, or the boogeyman or kukui or something will get you if you misbehave, if you do this or do that. All these different stories, kind of awful stories that kids are told, not just in Mexican American culture, but I think in a lot of cultures. So I think it's fun that it deals with that familiar story.
Mhm.
um, I think it's very nicely written, and I think she does something cool in there where it kind of turns at some point to like second person. It turns into like you are doing this, you are experiencing that, and I think that um, it sort of is an interesting way to pull you in and make you feel like you're part of it, which is how a lot of people hear not just this sort of ghost story or this spooky story, but ghost stories in general, right? When you hear them as a little kid, you picture yourself inside of them, you know. And I think we still do that to a certain extent with scary movies or books or TV shows or anything. Um, and I think that's part of the fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That was definitely agree with that. What's some advice that you would give to somebody writing their first book?
Yeah, I think you need. That's a good question. I think you need a lot of patience, um, and I think you need to know that it's not all going to go the way you want it to go. That, like, um, nobody sits down and just like hammers out a genius book and then you're done with it. I think what happens to a lot of people is they kind of have a cool idea or a setting or a character they want to explore, and they make a huge mistake, which is they sit down and they write chapter one, and then they start writing, and then they hit some sort of wall because their energy just sort of runs out at first,
Mhm.
and they don't know what to do next. And they're like, but God, I got to get to chapter two or three or whatever it is. And that's just too much pressure to put on yourself, right? Like, just kind of write. Just kind of do like you're all alone. It's not a book yet. Nobody's reading it yet. Just put sentences down on the page. And then later, much later in the process, work on like, well, wait, where does this book start? What is this about? Where's actual chapter one? Um, if you need to at first just sort of write pages and pages of just like characters' backstory or whatever, that's fine. Don't put the pressure of like, this needs to be great and this needs to be like my story. That's too much pressure to put on just like a stack of words. It's a first draft, right? You're going to write pages that you throw out. You're going to write pages that you think are going to be at the beginning that end up being at the end. You're going to write, you know 10 chapters and then throw them all away or rewrite them or turn them upside down or whatever, and that's fine because that's how it works. um, I feel like there's like this misconception that real writers, that like genius writers, can just sit down and write it. And that's just never been the case. That's never been the case for anybody, like ever. And even the few stories where people are like, well, actually, this writer did write it. Usually that's not like true at all. It's all just urban legends that those writers have, that has built up around those writers. So yeah, a lot of patience, and don't put unnecessary pressure on yourself.
I think it kind of stems from just you got to start. If you've got the idea, just start somewhere. And I think that's just a whole thing about life in general. So
Mhm.
many people want that perfect, nice box that you can fit everything into, and it just works right the first time. It just never happens that way. Um,
And that's fine. Like, it's not supposed to, like, if you were playing if someone handed you a golf club, you wouldn't expect to all of a sudden be like, "Maybe I'm secretly the world's greatest golfer." Like,
yeah.
no, you're not, but you
Mhm.
just go and have fun playing golf. It's the
Mhm.
same thing.
Yep. And you just got to start somewhere and work at it. And if that's what you want to do, and then you got to start somewhere and then just go with it sometimes. That's the other part. Some people can't go with it. Just kind of like go with this part and don't force it in a different direction. We're all guilty of that in some form or fashion.
Sure.
Um, we'll jump into another question. I love reading. You love reading. I'm just super curious what you're currently reading. Being a writer, it's always interesting seeing what you guys are reading.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading a few different things. I don't think I should have grabbed it here so that it's a little bit closer to me. One novel I'm reading now is called The Return, um, by a writer named Rachel Harrison. Um, that's really good. It's about a group of friends, and on like page one of them, they're adults, but one of them just goes missing. Like they go for a hike in the woods and they're just gone. And then, in the first 10 pages, 2 years go by and the person is still gone. And then they return, but something's not right about them.
Mhm.
And it's really creepy. It's a pretty like slow burn sort of creepy, but it's really good. It's called The Return by Rachel Harrison. Um, Another writer that I'll give a shout out to is Gabino Iglesias. He's a horror writer. Um, his new novel, The Devil Takes You Home, is really good. It's sort of like a crime novel, like a road crime novel, but it's also a horror novel at the same time, and that one's a lot of fun. Um, and uh, yeah, Tim O'Brien has a new novel out. I'm excited about that. He wrote The Things They Carry and some other like books dealing with his experiences in Vietnam. This new novel, it doesn't seem to be connected to Vietnam, so that'll be exciting to see where that goes. Yeah, there's always so many things.
That's really interesting. So if y'all keep track of those and write them down and check them out. Really want to thank you for joining us. If people want to know more about you, how do they find you? Are you
Yeah,
on social media? Are you on? Just give us a scoop on where you're located and how we can get more information about your books and all that.
sure. Yeah, there's some links on my website, which is richardzsantos.com. It's pretty out of date, but there's a lot of good links there to some of my most recent essays and stuff. Um, I'm fairly active on social media, especially on Twitter. Although things have been getting a little weirder over there, so who knows? That may change. But yeah, I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram as well. So yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Richard C. Santos. I'm the same thing on Blue Sky. And so, yeah, I'm easy. I'm easy to find out there. Feel free to reach out if people have any questions. I'll also be appearing at the Texas Book Festival this year in Austin, which is November 11th and 12th. And that's always a lot of fun, and um, happy to connect with people there if you were going. It's one of the biggest in the country, and so it's worth making your way over to Austin for, especially if you love books and want to hear from some writers from around the world.
Yeah, there's definitely some people that are probably tuning in or may watch later that would be interested in that. So thanks again for joining us, and check out his Twitter, and what was the other one? Blue Sky.
Blue Sky is one of these like new Twitter sort of like alternatives
Okay.
as Twitter's getting a little bit more unstable. That
Yeah.
are
So
migrating.
Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and then get a copy of A Night of Screams. Thank you again for Southwest 66 Credit Union for making this possible, and we thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks to the whole organization for inviting me.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.